Hi there, this is Shauna from the Foil Fox, and I'm here on the Paper Tray Ink YouTube channel, and I'm demonstrating a new card design using From the Garden. This is a new stamp set. It has two panels to it, and it has two big blossoms and with some layering stamps that go with it, so it will do the shading for you. Then it has a stem and other parts to the flower. And then it also has a matching die set that will cut out all of these parts for us. And then I'm also going to be using Perfect Pairs Essentials. This came out, a time I released it or so ago. But I love this because it has celebrate, birthday, congrats, and then some little sentiments that go along with it, and then the matching dies. Then for the background, I'm going to be using Thick and Thin Background by My Favorite Things. The papers I'm using are going to be quite simple. This is a piece of Tim Holtz watercolor paper, and I'm showing you the texture, how it is rough on one side and smooth on the other. But in the end, I use Bristol paper. Here is a card base that is 4 1/4 by 8 1/2 folded. And then some watercolor paper that's hot press. I like to use that, and some white cardstock. So to get started, I'm going to use the watercolor paper because I really want my inks to blend. I'm going to start out by cutting these pieces out, and you can see I'm going to use that negative part. If you've seen my videos before, you know that I use this negative part to kind of hold these pieces while I stamp them, so you kind of have perfect placement. And you can see that I also cut out a bunch of flowers, so I have some big ones, some little ones, and all the parts. I cut out so I had 4 or 5 flowers total, combined with the small and the large. And so I'm going to start out with the most heavily populated stamp. Whenever I use a layering stamp, I start out with the one that has the most to it. And this, of course, would be the most because it is solid. It is for the background. And then I'm going to put in the stem and these other pieces. This is, from me, the very easiest way to get perfect placement is to use a stamp positioner, cut them out first, and then ink them, so you can lay them over and get perfect placement, and then you can ink them. I'm using Pale Peony, and I'm going to just ink the pink up, and then using New Leaf for the green parts. And I'm going to spritz it. Every time that I ink, I'm going to spritz it. I'm using that watercolor paper, which is going to allow this ink to move. And I like that a lot better. Now you can see I didn't get complete coverage on my pink. So I'm going to add a little bit more because we all know that that's one of the real advantages of a stamp positioner, is that we can stamp it numerous times in the same place. But I think this one's only going to only take it 2 times. And I'm going to take these pieces out, and I'm going to put in other pieces that I cut out. They're just like this. We're just going to put them in the same little slots, and I'm going to continue to do this until all of the pieces are out. Now that little piece, I decided before I take this out, I didn't like it to be that color. I'm going to change it to pine feather. I wanted it to be a little bit darker. So now that I've stamped all those, I'm going to do another set just like we did. I'm not going to show you all of them as I stamp them, but I just thought I would give you kind of a quick review. This is of exactly what we did. We're going to use the Pale Peony on the solid part, the New Leaf, and then the pine feather for that little piece. And then spritz these every time so you can get that ink moving. And if you have to re-ink it, you can easily do that, but be sure to spritz it. So I did that with all the flowers. Now it's time to do some shading. There are 3, like I say, 3 stamps to each flower. And so I'm going to use the next most heavily populated for the big one and the small one, and I placed it onto the cut out so I can get perfect placement, and then stuck it to my door. I'm going to stamp it, and I'm using Berry Sorbet. And then I'm just going to continue on that as I get that stamped, I'm going to just put in the other ones, put them in their slot, and then stamp them. Now that I've stamped all of those in their second layer, I'm going to go for the third layer. This one is just is the deeper shades. It has very little to this stamp. It's just a little bit of an accent, and I'm using the Pure Poppy for that. I think the Pure Poppy, it seems, you would think it's a little bit dark, but it just really adds some pizzazz to our flowers. And now that the flowers are done, because it just needed those 3 stampings, there's these little lines that will give you little accents, a little dress up our little green parts to the flower. And so I'm stamping these with pine feather, and then I'm going to go back. You know, I stamped all of those little pieces with the pine feather too, and now I can just assemble these pieces. Now I have that green over the top, but in the end I'm going to switch that around. But I'm going to set those aside, and I'm going to work on the card front. So this is 4 1/4 by 8 1/2. I did use Bristol paper here. I wanted the ink to blend very nicely, and Bristol paper just has such a nice way to have the inks just kind of glide against the paper, and it goes on so nicely. I started out with Pale Peony, and I put that all over nearly to the bottom. I want a little bit of the bottom to show. You can see I'm erasing right there because with my sand eraser, because I got a little bit of ink there, but I'm going to stop and put a piece of paper so I don't get any more of those little of ink where I don't want it. And now I'm going to darken the top portion with Berry Sorbet. So first I did the Pale Peony, and I did that about almost probably like 7/8 of the way down, or maybe it's 3/4. You can kind of judge for yourself. And then using the Berry Sorbet up at the top, and then it gradually going to get lighter and lighter, so you can see how it has kind of that graduated color. Now that I have that the way I want it, I am going to use this stamp. This is a big 6x6 stamp. I am inking it up with Berry Sorbet, well, first with Pale Peony actually, and doing the top half of it with Berry Sorbet. I'm going to start at the bottom, because if I started at the top, then you would probably see where I stopped, because there wouldn't be any flowers there. But if I start at the bottom, because it's so big, it takes you almost to the top, and that's where the flowers are going to be. So you wouldn't see that. And so it's not going to be any problem if I have any overlap, or if actually I'm covering it up with this piece of paper, so there's not going to be any overlap, but there might be a slight seam there. And I'm using Berry Sorbet at the very, very top. So I used the Pale Peony down at the bottom, and then as I worked my way up, I used the Berry Sorbet. That's finished. I'm going to set that aside, and you'll see it later. But now I'm going to do birthday. Well, actually, happy birthday, but we're going to work on the birthday. I like to cut out all of them. Don't like to cut them apart because I have a tendency to lose the pieces. So normally I would stamp all of these, but for this demonstration, I'm just going to stamp birthday, because that's all that I'm going to be using for this card design. And I just laid that over so carefully so that it's got perfect placement, especially for words. This is the only way I can see how you can get perfect placement, is to cut the die first, then lay the stamp over top, and then put it on the door exactly, and then stamp it. I'm using VersaFine Black Onyx. I love this ink for sentiments because it is very, very crisp and gives you a very black kind of sentiment, which I like. It stamps so black. And then it has happy, a little tiny happy, which I am just going to stamp it on this little scrap of white cardstock. Then I'll cut it into a strip and just use a little bit of it. So here are all my pieces. Now you see I'm back at this background. I am very pleased with the way that this background turned out. I really like those lines in it, and you can see there's a slight seam, but you won't see that because the flowers are going to cover it. So there is no problem there. And now now that I have that front on the top, on the front of the card base, I'm going to put the flowers together. So I'm going to stick these little green parts. The dark green goes at the bottom, and then these are going to tuck in under the flower. If you can think about carnations, then you will know what I'm trying to achieve here. And I'm just sticking those together. And then once I get all of these glued together, then I'm going to put a little bit of foam tape on the back of each of these flowers. Now I have 5 flowers out here that I did. I did not do this card ahead of time, so I didn't have any trial run or anything like that. So I am not sure if I'm going to use 5 or if I'm going to use 3. I always do like to use an odd number. Seems to look a little better than a even one. So I had already decided it was either going to be 3 or 5. Once I tried the 5, I thought that was too much, so I'm going to go with the 3. So here are my 3. And I've kind of arranged them. You see I have the foam tape on the back. And just peel that off, and I'm going to slip that in place. Now I have a stem there that is not secured yet. I just have it there to kind of get an idea. But I'm going to move it now and then put this in place and the other blossom. Then I'll show you what I'm going to do with the stems. So here they all are, and I'm going to take a stem, and you might see a little bit of that stem peeking out, so up at the top. So I do need a little piece there, but I do also need it to continue on further down the card. So I took one of the stems, and then I'm going to use an extra one that I stamped and have it be like the continuation. And so I have the 3 stems, and I'm just going to glue them at the top and then at the bottom, and glue these stems down, just like they would probably fall if you were holding them or if they were in a vase. Then the ends I'm going to just trim off. So we're done with that, and we're nearly done with this card, because really all that needs to be done is to add the sentiment. And I've put foam tape to the back of the sentiment, so it's going to be easy for me to just place it. I have foam tape on the back of this little happy. We're going to just tuck that in, and now the card is all done. And I don't know about you, but these carnations are just so cheerful, and that carnations you can do in any color and it would work out great. I love the background with the thick thin lines. It really just adds some interest along with the kind of ombre or the graduated background. So I used, just as a review, I used the From the Garden Stamp and Die set, the Perfect Pairs Essential, and some assorted ink cubes, plus the My Favorite Things Thick and Thin background. You can go to blog.inktopaper.com and check out this project, as well as a lot more inspiration. And you can go to foiledfox.com, and there you would have all the supplies and tons more inspiration and a complete supply list, and that's at foiledfox.com. So you can go to either of those places. I want to thank you so much for joining me today, and I will see you next time. Bye.